Good evening and welcome to NUFC Matters with me, Steve Wraith. It's Wednesday night, which means it is retro night, and I'm joined by the panel to go through some memorable games and maybe some not so memorable games between Newcastle United and Stoke City. So I'm joined by George and Neil Mitchell, Steve Wilkinson, Steve Hasty and Stu Penman. And as always, George kicks us off with a trip down memory lane. George.
Yes, as usual, I'm afraid. But these are actual matches I went to, so I've got to be faithful to the fact that these are games I went to. Stoke City was an ace for the Chicken Road Academy, as I call it, because the boss of the academy was my grandfather, Thomas Davis Bryan, and the reason it is he was born in Stoke. In fact, he used to rejoice in telling people he was born in Hanley, the place where Stanley Matthews was born. So any Stoke City or Stanley Matthews game that was within reach, he would go and he would drag us along. So that particular week, the match in Saturday, 1st of October, 1949, I was getting Stoke City from breakfast time to supper time and all the things that were about that. But before I start with the game, I'd like to talk about the two respective managers. The first one is Bob McCrory. That's the bloke on his own, Steve. That's him. He joined Stoke at the same time as George Martin, our opera singing manager, joined Newcastle United. And the parallels with their appointments was fascinating. Can you put George Martin, the team photo on with George Martin on? There he is with his Homburg on it at the left-hand side. That's George Martin, as I say, the opera singing manager. Well, they joined their respective clubs within weeks of each other. And the parallels in what happened when they did join are quite interesting. First of all, McCrory was a fitness fanatic and also great disciplinarian. And he came across some very difficult times with the Stoke squad. And of course, George Martin inherited a club players that couldn't play them all. Imagine joining a club where you've got centre forwards like Roy Bentley, Albert Stubbins, Jackie Milburn, and there were at least two or three others, all Charlie Wayman, all international class players, and he couldn't keep them all happy. So he decided on to start to clear things out. And guess what? He sold a star player. Now, isn't that happened to Newcastle United before? George Martin actually sold a star player. He also took the very brave act of not just selling him, but selling him to Sunderland. And that man was Len Shackleton. So Martin got rid of Shackleton because he perceived that a lot of the dressing room trouble was being caused by Len Shackleton, because he was a cynical sort of guy, and he used to get under people's skin quite a lot, and so off he went to Sunderland. The parallel with McCrory was he was having trouble with people accepting his new fitness regime, and one player had his own fitness program, that was Stanley Matthews, and he resented McCrory trying to change that. So lo and behold, McCrory just transferred him to Blackpool, straight off. The star player gone. So these two managers started their careers at their clubs in a very, very suspect way, but survived for quite a while. McCrory was at Stoke for nearly 30 years. Anyway, the game, 49,903. It's at James's Park, and expecting a good game because Stoke at the time were pressing for the title. That's the external of the programme. And I think the team sheets on the next one, Steve, that's the teams that played. And you can see that Garbutt, Cowan, Batty, Harvey, Brennan, Crowe, Walker, Houghton, Milburn, Thompson and Mitchell, and Bobby Mitchell. And Stoke had a number of excellent players. Neil Franklin, right back, was an international. The two Mountfords, they weren't related, but there was Frank Mountford and George Mountford. And the left winger rather, Bowyer, Frank Bowyer, he was an international as well. So people were expecting a very, very close game. But it was one of those games where somebody suddenly decided that they would put a stamp on the game. And that somebody was a man called Jackie Milburn. And he just ran Stoke ragged. He scored the first goal himself. And then Frank Houghton scored. Tommy Thompson scored in the second half. Frank Houghton topped it off just before the end with a second one. In between, just before half time, Frank Bowyer scored for Stoke. The crowd was absolutely buzzing because of the form of Milburn. He was outstanding. And it was a nice big crowd. Have you got the crowd picture there, Steve, please?
Yeah.
And that's I don't think that's the exact crowd, but it's a similar crowd. And if you get in the crowd, you can see people waving their rattles. Well, just to add to that, okay, Steve. Just to add to that, there's a real one. There's a one that still belongs to me. And this one went to two cup finals with Harry, the Arsenal and Blackpool Cup finals. He hitchhiked all the way to Wembley to go to see the cup final and took this with him in his old RAF knapsack, along with his sandwiches. And I don't know how many sandwiches my mother gave him for a weekend, but it wouldn't be many in those days. But and it still works, by the way. But I'm not going to ring it in here.
Take it on Sunday, George, and give it a rattle.
Oh, I wish I could. Sadly, I won't be there on Sunday. But never mind. That's another issue. But the crowd were just enamoured and really taken by the form of Milburn, who just turned Stoke inside out. And it's interesting that was the team then. It could have been stronger. Neither of the Robledos played in that team. They weren't anywhere near the team. Have you got the picture of the Robledos, Steve, please?
Yeah.
There's George and Ted there. Ted on the left and George on the right, and they weren't even in the team. So particularly if George had played, it could have been even more goals scored. Interesting characters that there wasn't agents in those days. Their agent was their mother. Every deal they struck, their mother went with them. Wage discussions, Mum went to, and that's the way they were. They went back to Chile eventually. George had a glowing career as a manager of various big clubs in Chile, but Ted was a highly qualified seagoing engineer and went back to sea. And sadly, that's where he ended his days. He was found floating in a dockside somewhere in the United States, and people thought he'd been gambling and fallen out with somebody. But those two lads made a big impression on Newcastle and didn't even get in the team that day. But that's the way Newcastle was at that particular time. And that's the kind of things that Martin, as the manager, had to try and sort out. He did have a meeting with the whole team to try and see what he could do to quell some of the transfer requests. And when it was over and it was reported in the paper, it wasn't Martin that spoke, it was the director. It was Dr. Rutherford that spoke. And he said the players didn't have much to say. All they wanted to talk about was getting them better houses and better cars and that sort of thing. No mention of anything to do with football. Anyway, that's my first memory in 1949, 4-1 against Stoke City, and it was a memorable game.
Great stuff, George, as always, and thanks for supplying the photographs. Steve Wilkinson, on to you.
Good evening, everybody. I'm only going to go back a short time, 8 or 9 seasons, to my first game tonight, which was March 2013. And it was, if people remember, it was the season after we had our most successful time under Ashley when we finished 5th, and it should have been the time when we're pushed on. And typical of Ashley, didn't invest on the success of the previous year. We'd finished 5th, well behind Man City and Man U, who were level on points, 24 points ahead of us, but only 5 points behind Arsenal, 4 points behind Spurs, who finished 3rd and 4th. So we weren't a million miles away from the Champions League spots. Demba Ba had scored 16, Cisse 13, and Hettenbauer for 5 and Kabay 4. So, apart from the main 2 scorers, the rest weren't weighing in with too many, but there was other goals scored amongst the team. So it was an ideal chance to have pushed on, invested in the club to take it to the next level. And typical of Ashley, didn't do it. And so we're left with quite a smallish squad for playing in the Europa League, which was any club that's played in that has found a struggle to play Thursday.
I think so,
with a reduced size squad. So we were in the same boat. So the game I'm going to talk about was the Stoke game, which was actually sandwiched between 2 European games in March. Anzi Makachkala. It's
Easy for you to say, Steve.
I was going to say that. I've been practicing all afternoon, still haven't got it right. That was the last 16 round. So we'd done well to get to there, and we're drawn 0-0 on the Thursday, and then this game was the Sunday ahead of the second leg, which was only a week later on the Thursday night. So the game itself, we dominated the first game. It was a very windy day, and the problem with Stoke, I was terrified when we played Stoke because Peter Crouch was up there at 9'6" or whatever height he is, and it was always a problem to handle him. But we managed to hold off in the first half, and it went in at 0-0 at half time. But the second half started, and after 67 minutes, Stoke got a penalty. It was a foul by Tiote on John Walters, who took the penalty and put Stoke ahead, probably against the run of play, as it turned out. Even though unfortunately we weren't behind for too long, and the next goal was quite a memorable goal, which was a free kick by Kabay. Kabay, one of these players that sadly we didn't get the best out of. He wasn't here long enough, I think, in the sort of state the club was, and he went on, as everybody knew, to only Crystal Palace. It's a shame. We could have got more years out of him. But interesting free kicks. I saw I'd got fouled, and Stephen Taylor went to grab the ball, and then he's usually the cheeky self. He was having a bit banter with Begovic behind the goal. There's a classic of a fan taking a video on YouTube where it's from behind the goal, and you can see him almost mirroring the actions of Begovic as he's positioned himself, and Stephen Taylor was standing in front of him trying to put him off before. And I'm sure it had some impact, but I think even if he hadn't had that, the free kick was absolute precision. He just lifted it over the wall and right in the top hand corner, the sort of goal you drool over, scored by, even Messi. If he'd scored that, would have been drooling. So there it was, Johan Kabay scoring and equalising in this game. And we talked last week about the 10-minute flag, and it's always bugged me that people leave the match before the end. Well, you shouldn't have left the match this game, because if you left it at 90 minutes or 10 minutes from the end, you would have missed the winner, which was in the second minute of injury time. And it was by Papi Cisse. Ball came in. Sylvain Marveau had come on a sub, slipped the ball into the Cisse on the edge of the 6-yard box, marginally offside. And I think maybe, questionably offside, let's put it that way. And it's one of the reasons why I don't like VAR, because he lobbed it up, banged it in the bottom corner. Well, it just slid up his foot and slid in the net. The crowd goes berserk, but that's always the worry nowadays, that you accept that was a goal because the referee pointed straight in the middle. These days you've got to hang around, and it would have been one of these where they were drawing lines on the pitch, and you cannot properly celebrate. And there was a fantastic last minute winner, missed by anybody that left the game first. So that was a 2-1 win. We went on to win the second leg of the Europa League game on the Thursday night, amazingly, with another last-minute goal by Cisse again in the 94th minute this time. So again, if you left early, you missed that, which put us into the final tie we've played over in the time that they're actually on against Benfica And I had a great day out in Lisbon myself, and I'm guessing some of you guys went as well. So as far as the season went, we continued to struggle, and we ended up only finishing 16th, which is below par if we're going off what last season was like. Only 41 points as well, less. We're ahead of Sunderland on 39, and then teams that went down below us were Reading and QPR and Wigan, who were 36 points the maximum. So not a great season, apart from the European adventures, but missed opportunity by Ashley, and I'm sure you share my views that had we invested from that 5th, we would have done a lot better in the years to follow. So that's my story.
Great stuff, mate. Steve Hasty.
Good evening, folks. Well, my game, I'm going back to March the 24th, 1967. It's not quite as far back as George went, but not nearly, to be perfectly honest. The reason I picked this game is this was the second game that I went to at St James's Park. The first game being Blackpool the week before. So 2 games in a row, 2 games within 6 days, actually, because this game was played on a Friday night for some reason. I don't know why. I suspect it could have been to do with the FA Cup. It could have been that in those days they perhaps decided that you couldn't have league games on the same day as an FA Cup ties, for example, because this was obviously coming towards sort of 5th, 6th, and semi-final rounds when we're in March and the season's ending in May. I'm not too sure. I'm sure.
Was it Good Friday, Steve?
Some of the more historians among us will know. Steve, you might know.
I think it was Good Friday.
There you go. So,
I think we played them again on the Monday in the away game, which was quite common to play.
So there we were on a Friday watching the match. And the reason there was 39,000 turned up, and Steve, you're saying it's Good Friday. I think the vast majority of people turned up because we wanted to see George Eastham. It was one of the first opportunities that Newcastle fans had to see George since he came back, since he had left the club in around about 1960. But also he'd been a member of the World Cup squad the year before. So now there was an opportunity for us to see George Eastham in all his glory. It was a win. We won 3-1. It wasn't necessarily a great game, and I as a young sort of 7-year-old, you remember very little in those days. You remember the smell, you remember going up on the bus, you remember some of the little bits and pieces around you in the ground. But as far as the game's concerned, you're so little, sometimes things are passing you by. But I looked up in the book, and John McNamee scored after 8 minutes, and then Noble scored after 58. Stoke came back with Burrows after 70, and then Noble popped up again on 85. So there we were, a 3-1 win on a Friday. But that season itself, we finished 20th. There was only 2 got relegated in those days, and we finished 20th. We only got 33 points. It wasn't exactly a season covered in glory for Newcastle United. But there was some interesting little snippets as I was reading, and I found out that at the end of the season, we played 3 friendly games towards the end of the season, once the season was over. I don't know what that was all about, but Stoke actually went away to America, and they turned themselves into a club called the Cleveland Stokers. Now, at least 4 of the first team became members of the Cleveland Stokers, and this was an attempt where they would play 12 games in America, collective games, as a sort of start-up to what eventually became the NSL. Now, I was fascinated by the fact that the likes of Gordon Banks went in 1967 to carry on playing, and not only did they carry on playing, but they played all the way through May, all the way through June, and all the way through July, and then they would come back, and so they got no close season. Bearing in mind, they'd also been playing 46 league games at this particular point, and we talk about players being tired and injured. But among that list of teams, there was so there was representative teams. You had the Houston Stars, which were made up of players from Bangu Atletico of Rio de Janeiro. You had the Washington Whips, which were Aberdeen. I don't know where that come from. Perhaps some of the lads on the oil rigs now could explain what the Washington Whips are when they're spending their time in Aberdeen. I don't know. The Chicago Mustangs. That was Cagliari from Italy. You also had the Boston Rovers, which were Shamrock Rovers. Now, I can understand the connection there, Boston and
Yeah.
Shamrock Rovers in Ireland.
Yeah.
And then you had the Golden Gates, which were Den Haag of Holland. You had the New York Skyliners, which were Serio of Montevideo. You had the Detroit Cougars, which were Glentoran, again of Ireland. Then you had three teams, established American teams in Toronto, the Dallas Tornadoes, and the LA Wolves. And making up the rest of that league were the Vancouver Royals. Sunderland. What the hell is that all about? I'm completely baffled. But just looking up a little snippet about Stoke brings up all those crazy little facts in that particular game. Now, the league. I was just going to round off by saying that the league in those days, obviously, it didn't differ very much. The 42, the 22 teams didn't differ very much from the league now. The teams that are missing from today's Premier League, if we're playing, were Sheffield Wednesday, Sheffield United, West Brom, Forest, Fulham, Blackpool. You know, these are teams that are no longer in the Premier League. So, and then you've got obviously Stoke and Sunderland. But apart from that, the rest of the Premier League, as it is today, sits exactly the same clubs. So I know we talk about turnover in the Premier League and such like that, but some big clubs there, some big names, teams that we always class as being established teams. You know, we're not talking about some of the teams that have just appeared on the horizon recently, your Brightons and your Bournemouths. You know, you're talking about established clubs like West Brom, Forest, Sunderland even, and the two Sheffields. But that was my first game, the 1967, the return of George Eastham, and three very, very valuable points that were needed at the having finished the season in 20.
Yeah, great stuff. Okay, Mitch, on to you, mate.
So I'm going to take one a trip to Stoke, 11th of April 2009, or as Biffa from .com eloquently says, a trip to Stoke is like a time-up afternoon where all manner of Burberry-clad knuckle-draggers come out to play. And he couldn't be further from the truth, really, to be honest with you, on any trip to Stoke. This was under Shearer, as he was trying to save us from relegation. This was, I think, his third or his fourth game. He hadn't picked the point up yet. But one thing that was happening was change. He was working things out. One of the more random things that was starting to happen was exercise bikes were appearing near the dugouts to keep people fit. And I think that afternoon, I think Colaccini was on the bench. I think did the equivalent of the Tour de France on the exercise bike watching the game. The other thing he was working out was players, and one of them was Obafemi Martins, who trained all week, and then on Friday night at 10 o'clock called in sick and magically didn't make the game with a groin injury after having trained all week, and he realised he had a groin strain at 10 o'clock on the Friday night. And so you make of that what you will. The game itself was awful. We were forced to play a back four, which had three fullbacks in it, because of injuries as well. And going to Stoke with the way they play and the height they've got in their team, almost the inevitable happened on 33 minutes when Abdoulaye Faye scored the first goal for them. But to be fair to the back four and Steve Harper in goal, we put up a damn good fight. We cleared a couple off the line. Like Harper made a couple of point blank saves. And even their corner was controversial because the ball didn't come off Habib Bey, came off of Ricardo Fuller, their striker, but that's maybe me being a whingy sod. Either way, we did really, really well. And then 81 minutes, Carroll had been on the pitch barely 10 minutes, and what a difference he'd already made. He managed to scramble Elite Equaliser forward, mad celebrations, fantastic afternoon, late afternoon, early evening in the sun, as you can see. Shearer's first point, and it was the first sign that maybe we've got a bit of hope here, because the team actually showed that they had a bit of passion and fight. But maybe that was because he was weeding out the ones who weren't up for that fight and were just there to take their money. The overriding memory of that game, though, around about that time, Stoke were being held up as having the loudest ground in the country. Now, myself and Jamie Fender were sitting together in our end, and one thing we noticed halfway through the first half was you could hear the Stoke fans behind it, which was unusual because there was no Stoke fans behind it at all. And you could say, oh, it's acoustics. Well, that's odd in a ground that has 2 open corners. I've been in Arrowhead Stadium, the loudest ground in the NFL, and I can tell you what a loud ground sounds like, and what happens with acoustics, and that's an open bowl, but it doesn't have open sides. We are convinced to this day, and you can't tell me otherwise, that how Stoke got their volume up was backfeeding it through the PA system. There was no way the noise could be coming from behind, but without that, and if you listen very carefully, there was more than just an echo. I think it was very cleverly done by someone, but I'm convinced they were backfeeding crowd noise through the PA. To be fair, that was all we could talk about on the way home. Was this so-called loudest ground in the country? And to be fair, we've heard louder at Roker Park, if we're going to be really honest. But that's my first game. Season didn't end terribly well, but that was the first glimmer of hope and the first weeding out of a few bad apples in the barrel.
Great stuff. Okay, Stu, on to you for your first recollection.
Well, it's nice to see John from QTech in the chat, and get well soon, mate, as quick as you can. And I was just laughing because I was going to mention how far George goes back, but you know, if you're playing trumps, he just plays his trump card first up every time, doesn't he? So I'm going back to the game that people have mentioned in 1995. He's like 40 years beyond that. You can't win, can you? So I thought I'd have a little thing as Steve Hasty mentioned in the 3-1, because as you know, I put a tenner on 3-1 every game, so I wonder if he put a tenner on that game. Right, I'll get me cut. So we're back to the 25th of October 1995. It's the 3rd round of the League Cup. It's the old Victoria ground before the Bet365. Proper cup atmosphere for the midweek fixture. And it was fueled because we were acknowledged as the best team in the country at this stage. And October, obviously 25th, October's nearly finished. And we've only been lost. I think we've lost only once that season so far. You know, so we're doing really, really well. But I need to take you back to the beginning of that day. This time, half day from work, I went with Darren, who I've mentioned a few times. We got picked up from the Howlet instead of the Sport Arms, so like we're going up in the world. And there was a guy that used to work with us called Simon Howarth, and one of the minibuses picked him up. Well, the one I was in picked him up from Burtley. So you can imagine with a certain criteria of supporters. And by the time we picked him up from Burtley, we hadn't got far past Washington Services. And Simon turned around and went, "This is the best away trip I've ever been on," because of the special cigarettes and the amount of alcohol that was available on the bus. So on the way down, we stopped off at a place, and I still can't remember how it's pronounced. It's either Sandbach or Sandbach, depends which part of the country you're from. So there was it's a little town, but there was a quiet village place, and we stopped off in this pub, which was a village pub, to be fair. You know, it's one of those where you expect if you had a bit on this side, you'd take it there for a meal, and you know, no one would know you were there, sort of thing, apparently. And so, rumour had it anyway. Not that I'd travel that far, but anyway, so we went into this bar, 40 of us, and we're all steamed up off the bus in whichever shape or form you want to be steamed up. And they didn't know what had hit them. You know, you can imagine, like, everyone just shouting Newcastle songs. There was no one there to even to tease or bait. So the bar staff were very happy. Well, the owner was behind the bar. He was delighted with the amount of service and the speed that people were drinking, because we were told we had like 90 minutes to drink as much as we can. So it was like one of those, like, you've only had 5 pints, what's wrong with you? So me and Darren ended up playing on the fruit machine until I won't mention the guy's name because he might use it. The usual suspect comes across with a crowbar and asks us to just keep playing the machine, and while he shuffles behind it and goes to work with his crowbar and then empties the machine. To the point that we're saying, like, hang on, we've just lost some money. How much you lost? And it was 12 quid. So he says, well, there's 20. That'll keep you happy. I says, no, 12 quid each. So we ended up getting 20 quid each, which was quite happy in those days. They were happy enough with that. End up that bar probably had more take-ins in that 90 minutes than they would have had all week, I would imagine. but it did lose some money from behind the machine. So then we get back on the buses and headed to Stoke. And Stoke were a bit famous for their naughty 40, I think they nicknamed themselves. And we got stopped just on the outskirts. Maybe it's about 2 miles from the ground. You can see the floodlights in the distance. And we got stopped by the police for a stop and search. Now, I can only think that the constabulary in Stoke, or it's Staffordshire, isn't it? Wherever it's Stoke, that there must have been blind policemen, because they searched the bus and either found nothing or decided it was best to say they found nothing, and we were to carry on. And just as they got off the bus, they got a radio through to say that there was a lot of trouble near the ground and no more vehicles were to get in, which was like music to the ears to the people on our buses, and that emptied the bus as quick as I've ever seen a bus get emptied. You know, all fueled up, and off they went searching for a bit of fun. So eventually we get inside the ground, and it was a full house. Like a Wednesday night cup game, it was a full house. You know those games. Remember when you could smoke in the grounds and you could see the smoke where the floodlights were and everything else. It was like that, and it was a proper good atmosphere. The game, to me, it was just a game of Newcastle keeping the ball. That's the game they were playing. We'd play a keep ball, and Stoke were playing a game of let's kick Ginola as often as we can. And we had the away strip on that everyone raves about. I still think our yellow one was better, like that we won at Man United with. That's another debate. And eventually some lad got sent off for kicking Ginola one too many times. And that was even that at that stage we were nils each, but we knew that was game over as a contest. And then Sexy Peter Pedro put us ahead. With the first, it was good work, I believe, by Warren Barton, and Beersley jumped off the floor and rifled one in with his left foot, and that put us one up. And not long after that, he doubled the lead and doubled his goal tally when he got put through, and he was a bit fortuitous. Like the ball bounced off him, then it bounced off the centre half's leg, fell to Beersley, but again with his left foot, put it straight into the corner out the keeper's reach. So we're now 2-0 up. And someone said in the chat that Keith Gillespie Dizzy had a bet in the game. Well, as long as he bet Newcastle win, his money was safe that day. No, I wasn't on the clip. I was on a bus, minibuses from the Howlett. The third goal was Les Ferdinand's, who at the time was his 12th goal in 8 games, which broke a club record at the time. I know we're all talking about Willock playing on Sunday and scoring his 8th in 8. But this was 8 in all competitions, obviously, because this was a cup game. But 12 goals in 8 games. So he put one away. And as we were known as the entertainers, the fourth goal was scored by the person who was the most forward on the pitch for us. And that was good. Again, good work by Gillespie and by Beardsley. But the person more forward on the pitch, can you name him? Any of you name him?
Darren Peacock.
Yeah, Darren Peacock was sent off on the left wing and edge of the 6-yard box and tucks it away. I mean, that's how we were. So yes, we were the entertainers, and it was
that game. Sorry to interrupt you. That is the game that Keith Gillespie did have money on, and he said if you watch the footage back on YouTube very closely, you will see all the players running up to celebrate with Darren Peacock, except for him, because he just cost him 70 grand.
Wow. I'd say what you would have been happy that the ball went to Peacock of anyone. All the players on the pitch is like giving him. But yeah, me, I didn't know that he'd lost 70 grand. I knew he'd had a bet in the game, but not that much. So yes, we were the entertainers, but then we also had the chicken run back to the buses. And again, this is time before mobile phones were popular and everything else, and people just used to have to use the savvy instead of using the Navi, I suppose, as it is now, isn't it? The navigator and this, that, and the other. So we eventually got back to the bus. We decided to skip the bar that we stopped off on the way back. On the way down, we ended up getting a chippy somewhere back in Newcastle early hours in the morning. All was good. Good time had by all, and 4-0 up. We win the game. The next round we're away at Liverpool. We win that, and you think, well, we're going to win the cup. We have to with this team. But then, and that was the Arsenal game we talked about right at the start of the retro. where Lee Dixon decided that Junola shouldn't be allowed to walk, and they end up winning 2-0. And that was it. That's my first game.
There's another T-shirt for John from Q-Tech to sort out when he's up his sick bed, using the savvy, not the navi. And that's a classic, that, like, with an Umbro trainer on a Gazelle or something like that.
Aye.
Okay, big shout out to the sponsor, Spider VPN, Google Spider VPN. They come up at the top of the Google search list, and they will help protect your computer, stop people nicking your passwords, things off your computer. Just all-round great protection from Spider VPN. Big shout out to them for their sponsorship for the last few months, and skipsandbins.com, telephone 0800 25 45 25 3. Email inquiries at skipsandbins.com, website www.skipsandbins.com. Easy, contract free, and pay as you go waste collection. Also, a big shout out to our other two main sponsors this month, L&G Family Funeral Directors, 0191 389 7245, and Darren Baldwin Funerals, who's back with us for a month. You can get in touch with him on 0191 478 2730 or their website www.darrenbaldwinfunerals.co.uk. Big shout out to John at qtechshop.co.uk. Great to see him in the chat, and he's well on the road to recovery now. Just keep them feet up and keep resting, John. And also a big shout out to John at Jab Signature, the maker of all of our flyers. And hot off the press is this week's Fab 4 poster. Drum roll for this one. Young Guns. I like it. I like it. Steve, you're looking dashing there. Yeah, it's a good one. Keith with hair, me with hair, and Mitch doesn't look too different there next to Kiefer Sutherland. But Young Guns, yeah, love it. Thanks to John. Thanks to John for that. If you're a first-time visitor to the channel, please subscribe. Hit the Newcastle Legends logo in the bottom right-hand corner. Click the thumb up to like the video, which is important to us. Click it to share to your social media. Drop into the comments for like-minded chat with like-minded Newcastle United fans. And John also from QTech runs our website, NUFCmatters.com. Lots of T-shirts on there for people to get their hands on. And Steve Wilkinson is modelling the Ryan Taylor Over the Wall T-shirt tonight, which is a good fit, and great to see him wearing that in Sunderland. And the Farmhouse Kitchen presents an evening with me in Supermark. Not many tickets left for this now. August the 19th. Tickets are a tenner. Get yourself onto the Farmhouse Kitchen in Gateshead. They will tell you how to buy the tickets. And just a reminder as well that I have got an evening with Newcastle Legends coming up, of course, at the Tyne Theatre, and that tickets are still available on Groupon and on Voucher for that. Okay, back to you, George, for your second game, mate.
Okay, Steve. Quickly, I'd answer one or two of the questions along the bottom. So one of the contributors said that Neil Franklin ended up in Chile. Well, he did, because along with England lost infamously to United States 1-0 in the World Cup, and about 6 of the squad didn't come home. They stayed in America, and they went to South America because they were tapped up by South American agents and became coaches in places like Chile and Peru. And guess what? Another one of them was a man called Charlie Minton, and that has an impact on us because a few years later he comes home as our manager. So that the guy that mentioned Neil Franklin going to Chile was absolutely right, but he wasn't alone. There was about 5 or 6 of them just didn't come home. They stayed in America and let the rest of the squad come home on their own. Anyway, that's an aside. My next game is Saturday, 18th of August, 1951. It's a big game because we are playing well in the position to try and challenge for the league. Stoke were playing not very well in a position to get relegated. So it was going to be quite a game. In fact, have you got the last program, Steve? I think there's a program for this one.
Mate. Yeah, I have, mate. Yes, there it is.
And lo and behold, the FA Cup's on the program because we were the holders then, which was quite good. Incidentally, I went onto eBay again, and both of those programs, the one with the cup on is selling at the minute, if you've got a good quality one, for £25. And the first one that I put on is 20 quid. So there's some money in those old programs. God, I must have thrown a fortune away when I left my mother's house. Never mind. But that was 51. We were cup holders, and this game was as I say, important to them because they were looked like going down. Important to us because we had a chance to win the league. And 47,047 in the ground, and it was quite a game. It was a fascinating game, but as always with some of these games, taken over by one individual player, and that was George Robledo. Stoke just couldn't touch Robledo. He scored one himself. He made 3 for Jackie Milburn, 1 for Charlie Crowe, and Bobby Mitchell got a late penalty. We beat them 6-0, and it was a cakewalk, sadly. But the team was away from the cup team. Lowry in goal, Cowell, Garbett, Harvey, Brennan, Crowe, Walker, Taylor, Mitchell, Robledo, Milburn, Robledo, and Mitchell, and they just ran Stoke ragged, even though they had Bowyer and Mountford still in that team, still internationals, and Mould, an international defender. They just couldn't touch George Robledo, and he ran them absolutely ragged. Incidentally, in the return game at Stoke, we beat them 5-4, which wasn't too many weeks later. And the net result was that they ended up getting relegated, and we ended up 8th when a lot of people thought we should have been a lot higher than that. And how many times do we say to ourselves, well, what happened there? Well, there was a lot of questions in the Chicken Road Academy about why we were only 8th when we could have been so much higher. It was 8th, but the difference between the points for 8th and the points for top 2 weren't that great, to be perfectly honest. But unfortunately, we had a habit of dropping the silly points at home and not always away to teams that were lower down than us. But it was a fantastic game, and as I say, the Milburn hat-trick sent people home very happy. But the performance to really set the town light was from George Robledo. By this time, of course, our George Martin, our opera singing manager, had been sacked. But Stoke still had Bob McCrory as their manager, but had brought in a young manager called Arthur Turner, who was to become quite famous manager later on to help them run the Stoke squad. But it wasn't long after this, the relegation, that McCrory was sacked. But he came back a couple of years later to take Stoke again. So that was my second game, which was a memorable one, a 6-0 win in August 1951.
Great stuff, George. Okay, Steve, on to you for your second game.
Yeah, well, I'm coming right up to date as far as playing Stoke's concerned, because it was the 17-18 season just 4 years ago when they ended up getting relegated, and we finished in 10th. But at the time the game was played in September, we'd actually had a ropey start to the season. We'd lost the first 2 league games and also got knocked out of the League Cup in the first hurdle by Notts Forest. But we actually went on a run of 3 wins in a row, and this being the third of those. And for we were at the dizzy heights. I know the league table doesn't bode much for the end of the season at this stage, but we're actually 4th, and it's one of those things. I think I captured it on when it came on the TV screen. You take a photograph of your telly just so you can see us in the dizzy heights of 4th. But obviously we didn't stay there. But it was good to be on a decent run at the beginning of the season. The game we won 2-1, and just briefly on the goals, but the actual highlight goal of the game was actually scored by Stoke, which I'll come into in a minute. We went ahead in the 19th minute, cross from Matt Ritchie on the right hand side, and put it across to the far post, and stealing in from the left was Christian Atsu, who virtually had a tap in from a couple of feet to give us the lead. But then in the 57th minute was a goal by Sheridan Sakiri. Now he's a player that I've admired all the time. Primarily just seeing him playing for Stoke, but like every other player, we've been linked with him over the years, and it was certainly somebody I would like to see with the power he's got and the speed to get into and get the ball into the box. And this was a typical Shaqiri goal. Picked the ball up out on the right wing, cut in and cracked it in into the bottom corner of the net with great power from just outside the penalty area. I looked up Shaqiri's 10 best goals, and this one wasn't one of them. And when you look at those goals on there, there's some classics. There's an overhead kick he scored for Liverpool, I think. Some goals he scored for Switzerland in international matches, and some screamers into the top corner. So he was a player, and he's given us problems over the years, both in this sort of game for Stoke, and he scored for Liverpool against us, and I think he laid on a couple in some other games. So he's always been a troublesome player, and but this was a good goal to equalise. But it was only 10 minutes before we regained the lead, and another goal involving Matt Ritchie, who took a corner on the right, and similar to what we saw last season, Lascelles became the critical goal scorer, and he scored with a header from the second game in a row, which I think he did last season, as you might remember. So, and that gave us a 2-1 win. So as I say, we that was early in the season, and we didn't keep the run up, but we did finish 10th, and it was Rafa trying to mould that team into a better team. And you might remember Kennedy came in on loan, and he got to Bravka. But it was interesting looking at the team and some of the players that we've still got compared with what we've got now. And arguably, you could say that we've probably got on paper better players. I know the old saying is they don't play on paper, but and a lot to do with the quality of the coaching. But if you look at we had that the midfield and forwards that day, we're playing 4-3-3, and it was midfield was Mikel Merino, you might remember, Hayden and Ritchie in midfield, and Perez and Atsu and Joselu up front. And if you compare that with possibly a midfield that might play on Sunday, Shelby instead of Merino, Hayden could play, Ritchie could play. You replace Wilson instead of Perez, ASM instead of Atsu, and even Joe Linton or Gale against Joselu. Arguably, we've got a better team, as I say, on paper from now, but whether we can go on and be coached into being as good as we can be and strengthen over the years, and if we've got add to that Almiron Murphy and maybe Willock will if he comes in, fingers crossed. Strength wise, we've got a reasonable squad. We just need to make sure that the coaching and the tactics are right. So that was a good game to win. As I say, we finished 10th that season. But it didn't work out for Rafa as he tried to build that team going forward, even though the following year we probably had even a strong team, but things didn't work out. That's my second game, man.
Great stuff, Steve Hasty.
Right, I'm going back to 2007-2008. Start of the 2007-2008 season, I was watching what was probably the worst football that I'd probably ever seen. Certainly as an adult at St James's Park. I had no faith in the manager. I was down. I just couldn't believe what I was turning up watching week in, week out. I was causing all sorts of downers in the pub after the match because of my venomous attacks on Sam Allardyce. And having witnessed a third round cup game previous Saturday, I was just like probably never going to go back. It was literally getting to that point. The football was just so dire. I picked my daughter up from school, 3:30. I remember a couple of the dads asking us, "Are you going to the match tonight, Steve?" Nah, probably never darken the doors again. And then at 4:00, it came on the radio in the car that Kevin Keegan had taken over from Sam Allardyce, who had been sacked. Now, even with Allardyce already gone, the list of people who had been named as possible coming in were Houllier, Mark Hughes, who I couldn't stand anyway, and Didier Deschamps. Now, the first and the last for me were just sort of typical press stories, and I thought we're going to end up with Mark Hughes. We're going to end up with like Sam Allardyce Mark II, and I was just so down. And then to suddenly hear that Keegan was coming up, that was it. I was out the door, and I never eaten me dinner so quick, and I flew out the door. Didn't have a ticket, obviously, so I could get the ticket office. And managed to get a ticket. And even though Kevin had absolutely nothing to do with team selection, even though he didn't turn up until about 10 minutes after kickoff, and even though the kickoff had been delayed for 15 minutes because the crowd outside trying to get tickets were causing absolute chaos. And it's not like Northumbria police mind to suddenly turn around and be pleasant to Newcastle fans by saying, hold the kick-off, lads. I'm surprised they didn't just say, get it kicked off at 7:30, because let's face it, the number of times that we've wanted games to be delayed because there's been crowd congestion and stuff like that, and it's never happened, and you've missed something exciting. But this game kicked off. And within, a matter of minutes, we're 1-0 up. Michael Owen. Do you remember him? Yeah. Aye, well, he said the better. Emery gets sent off, and then Kachapa playing the centre half alongside Stephen Taylor popped up with a goal. 2-0 at half time. I'm looking at the team here. The team that Nigel Pearson picked on paper wasn't a bad team, and we've again, Steve, how many times we said on paper, not a bad team.
Yeah.
Carr, Taylor and Kachapa, Rosie Enrique. That's your back four. Then you had Milner, Emery and Zogbia and Duff. And then up front you had Viduka and Owen. Now, that for me is looking at the squad that he had, you would have probably gone, that's probably the strongest team you could put out. On the bench, he had Rosenthal, he had Carroll, he had Kasenga Lawar, Harper, and young David Edgar. I mean, that was the bench. 35,000 turned up for that game. Second half, James Milner, he slotted one in, and then Damien Duff. He made it 4. That was Duff's first goal at St James's Park. It was only second goal for Newcastle. Stoke managed to pull one back, but let's face it, I mean, that game, that must have been the easiest game for Nigel Pearson to manage, but also the most difficult personally, because he's standing on the touchline, nobody's taking any notice of him, and everyone's looking up to what's going on in director's box, and everyone's so euphoric. I looked on the internet. Biffa, you talked about Biffa before, Mitch, and Biffa described the conditions for that game as utopian, and that was it. And I thought that's absolutely brilliant. For the 35,108 that were in that particular ground, it was utopian. But what strikes me about that game was that the moment when the rot set in for Ashley, because everything after that just seemed to turn to crap, didn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, the only people he signed were there was Jimenez, Wise, and Viteri. They were his 3 main signings at the end of that, after Keegan. I mean, absolutely ridiculous. But you know what? And even then, even when you think about it, I mean, Allardyce only won 7 games that season. Kevin only managed to win 4, but he managed to stop the rot just at the right time. He managed to go on a 7-game unbeaten run, and that was enough for to stop us being relegated. And then you look at the close season, and they sold Rosenthal, they sold Milner, sold Emery, it sold Carr, Ramage, but we brought in Gutierrez, we brought in Guthrie, Bassong, Colaccini, Cisco, but obviously the Cisco and Gonzalez were the straw that brought the camel's back, bearing in mind that Kevin has subsequently said that the players he was looking for were Bastian Schweinsteiger and Sami Hyypiä, so he's expecting those two, and he gets 2 players who he doesn't even know anything about. But that for me, I mean, it might have been utopian for the fans, but if we look back and we'll think that was the moment where, despite everything, looking back, I bet you Ashley just thinks that was my downfall. Not the particular game itself, but what he did just a short period after with the likes of Viteri and Jimenez and Wise, and then bringing in, I mean, because it was Chris Mort who was had a big part to play in bringing Kevin, but obviously he didn't last the season as well. And then you had the sort of horribleness that ended up with Keegan going at basically after 1-2 games. September he was gone, and then the ridiculous situation of having Joe Kinnear brought in as a manager who hadn't managed himself for about 4 or 5 seasons anyway. So, looking back, I just think that the buzz, the excitement, everything was there, everything was in place. And then Ashley comes in with his scythe and just goes, you know what? No, I'm not having it, lads. You're getting too excited. And the rest was history. Kevin gone, the relegation, the end of the following season. And, really, I would say things have never been the same inside St. James's Park since then, to be perfectly honest.
Yep, I would agree. Mitch, on to you, mate.
Take me back to April 1990. Newcastle United, who'd won 5 in a row, pushing for promotion. And excuse me, it's Stoke team who were in poor form, fighting relegation, had been pretty much bottom most of the season. They'd only won about 4 games, annoyingly one of them against us on Boxing Day. But this was one occasion where we went into a game favourites in a situation like this, and we didn't cock it up. We started like a steam train. Should have had a penalty on 2 minutes when Brock was brought down in the box. But a minute later, first goal for the club by one Benny Christensen, the Rolls Royce of a centre half, if ever there was. A centre half out of his time for me, and I'll talk about that in a little bit later. And from that minute, Stoke were done. When a team just are done. I seem to remember if we won the game 3-0 ultimately, but the man of the match was Stoke's keeper, a lad called Fox, I think, if I remember right. It was one of those games where keeper he was just bombarded. It was almost like training for him, and he was stopping it with everything he had, and getting zero help off his back four just about. Heads down. It was amazing that it took another 30 minutes for the inevitable goal from Mickey Quinn that season. I think that might have been his 39th goal or something that season. It was ridiculous. Mark McGee should have had 2. The amount of last gasp stops they made was just ridiculous. Second half was more the same, and it was amazing that it took 70 minutes when Benny Christensen then got his second goal for the club. And that's a hell of a goal. If you look at what he does, he brings the ball out from defence, goes almost halfway into the opposition half, plays a 1-2, and then carries on and tucks it round the keeper with the outside of his foot. Absolute quality goal from a quality player. And Benny Christensen, he's somebody I would love to see in the modern game. I think he was a centre half out of his time. Yeah. I think in the modern game, I think people would rave about him because the ball skills he had.
Not his tash though.
Not his tash, and not his running style either. Which he looked like he was running through. Looked like he was running through honey. It was quite.
Raheem Sterling. He runs like how Raheem Sterling runs.
Yeah, he did that. The angle he's at.
An invisible handbag or something.
Yes, absolutely. But
foghorn, leghorn.
But what an absolute quality player he was. We picked up these 2 Danish players, and they were like chalk and cheese. You had Frank Pingle, who is certainly one of the worst centre forwards I've ever seen in a black and white shirt, and Benny Christensen, who was just like I say, Rolls Royce of a defender. I love the man. So that's my second game in a nutshell.
Great stuff, Stu. Finish us off on the games, please.
Yeah, my second game is Boxing Day 2013. It's we win 5-1, 51,000 plus crowd to celebrate George's birthday, and what turned out to be a very comfortable win. Right, because there's a lot of goals, I had to write some notes, but I remember the game started off. We were on a good run up to that point, and the game started off turgid, I suppose is the right word, lackluster. And Stoke just played the normal spoiling tactics and then ended up getting control of the game. And they scored a really good goal, to be honest. They cut in from the inside and from the left, and then curled one at the top corner. I know one of those where that curls, and doesn't matter how far the keeper dives, he's not going to get it. It just goes right in the top corner. really good goal. But then what followed after that was probably, well, not the most, but it definitely up there in the top levels of the most bonkers 5 minutes I've seen at St James's. I was back again for Christmas. No, I was living in Lancaster at the time, so I was up anyway for Christmas, and I was at the game with the Heat. The second, there was a sending off. Remy. No, it wasn't the first. Sorry, I get me confused now. The first sending off was Noel Whelan. He fouled, or Glenn Whelan, or something like that. One of the Whelans, anyway. He fouled Kabaya twice in the space of a couple of minutes. And you had the ref already booked him. The second foul was worse than the first. You know, sometimes you get the complaints like, you know, that shouldn't have been sent off. It shouldn't be sent off. But the second foul was worse than the first. And off he goes. But what was really funny was Mark Hughes doing some sort of Welsh jig on the touchline, having a proper tantrum. And he's mouthing off at the ref. And the ref turns away and walks back up the pitch. Hughes carries on with this rant. Whatever he's saying and shouting and swearing, the fourth official grasses him up. The ref marches back over, red card, and off he goes in a huff. But the most comical part was he had his coat and threw it on the floor like a petulant child that had been sent to his bedroom or something, and off he went. And then the game starts again, and like Remy gets put through, and he gets brought down, and it has to be. He's the last man, brings him down. It's a red card and a penalty. So they've had 3 people sent off in the space of about 4 minutes. And Remy at this time hadn't scored for a while, and he ends up taking a penalty. Unfortunately, it was a poor penalty, and it was straight at the ex-Mackham Sorensen. He saves it, but we're 1-0 down. They're down to 9 men, and not even Newcastle, in all the time any of us have watched it, even going back to George's first games, not even that Newcastle could mess this up. So Ben Arthur decides I fancy a bit of this thing. He's getting obviously more space on the wing because of the need to fill up the middle with the 9 men they've got. He does his little dance, crosses it, and without thinking, Remy, without having time to think, puts the ball away with a deflected shot. Yeah, and it goes. That was his second one, actually. But he scores, and he's going into half-time. So what I do at half-time, I'm now a proud owner of a mobile because we're in 2013. Message John Carver and say, "How are you, John? It's George's birthday, man. Give the lad a show." So he has a word with the players, and they come out all fueled up for the second half. Again, we start the second half how we finished the first. Ben Arthur doing a little dazzle, and this time he provides the ball for Gouffran to score, who, once I did a bit of research, that was his 5th goal in a row, apparently, in 5 games. So you think, right, we're 2-1 up. They're down to 9 men. This could be a cricket score. It really could. Kabaya hits the post. Ben Arthur hits the post. Kabaya then scores the third, which was a really good move. And you know how he used to sweep the ball into the net. He had the talent to do that. He put that in. So that was us 3. Remy scores his next one with a header that you've just shown. And then we get another penalty. By this time, Remy's been taken off. I don't think he was going to be allowed to take the next one anyway. And Pape Cissé is on. Now, Cissé hasn't scored for about 17 seasons at this stage. I mean, I don't think it was as long as that, but I don't think he scored that season. It was probably from the season before through injuries and not playing or whatever. But he takes the penalty and he puts it away, and we're 5-1 up. There's still about 10 minutes to go. And in all fairness, we could have had at least another 2 penalties, because I remember Ben Arthur getting body checked, and any other time it would have been definitely a penalty. But I think the ref was like thinking, I can't send someone else off and give another penalty. So it was superbly entertaining. It was nice to have a good win on Boxing Day. Nice to be at home on Boxing Day as well. And the hungover crowd went out and got drunk again to be hungover for the 27th. So that was my second game. 10 goals in 2 games. I think I've done
brilliant
well.
Stuff. Great recollections as always, lads. I always enjoy listening to the stories. And now it is time to have a look at some celebrity fans. I've got to be perfectly honest, lads. Some of these are really dubious. But I think you'll get all of these, and I think you'll get most of the players as well. Players that play for both teams. But yeah, we'll go.
Slash
from Guns N' Roses, of course. I'm sure the Stoke City fans see him at every home game.
Julian Clary.
Julian Clary.
Julian Clary, yeah, another rather strange one. It just gets worse, by the way.
Sugar Ray Leonard.
Yep,
Yeah, he's
Sugar
a
Ray
proper
Leonard.
Stoke fan, isn't he?
Yeah, real Stoke fan. I mean, obviously, yeah, part of the naughty 40, I would imagine.
Yeah, well, glad he wasn't.
Aye.
Jeremy Bates.
Jeremy Bates.
Tennis, aye.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Nick
Hancock.
And Nick Hancock, who I think is probably, along with Jeremy Bates, the only genuine ones in there. But that was all I could find. Very hard to come by celebrity Stoke fans. Maybe people just not wanting to take any responsibility for it. Okay, players that played for both teams. Here we go.
No
Michael
comment.
Michael Owen.
Sick note.
No comment.
He
Sick
played
note.
for neither team, really.
Michael Owen.
Well, he wore the strip.
Stephen Island.
Stephen Island.
Stephen Island.
George
George
Easton.
Easton.
George
Easton.
Easton, yeah.
George Easton.
Michael
Michael
O'Neill.
O'Neill.
Michael O'Neill, yeah.
Michael O'Neill, current manager.
Steve Guppy.
Steve Guppy.
Guppy, aye.
Difficult to find one of them in a Stoke strip, but also played for Port Vale.
Shola.
Shola Amiobi, the Mackham Slayer.
Oh, Griffin. Andy Griffin.
Yeah, Andy Griffin.
That's
One of the Fies.
yeah.
Aye.
Okay, well, I'll put that one up as well.
Both the
And that's
Fies.
your one of the Fies.
Both of the Fies.
That's Andy.
That one's Abdulli, that's Andy, yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
That's Andy, yeah.
Classic.
Jonathan
John Woodgate.
Woodgate.
And last but by no means least,
Shea Given.
Shea Given.
you're given clean sweep then. Okay, let's get your 1 to 11s, lads, and your manager. George, have you got a team for us, please?
Yeah. Shea Given, Jeff Nulty, Abidoli Fai, Woodgate, Griffith, Alan Suddick, who ended up there, Paul Bracewell, Shola for old time's sake, John Tudor, and last but not least, Paul Gallagher. And my manager would have been, because I liked him as a player, I always thought we didn't use him well enough, is Michael O'Neill.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, good stuff. Steve Wilkinson.
Yeah, well, I'm very, very similar to George, actually. Shea Given, Andy Griffin, Woodgate, Nulty, Abdullah Faye. Midfield, I had Paul Bracewell, George Easton, and Alan Suddick. Up front, John Tudor and Shola. And I was tossing up between Michael Owen and Josselou, but I think I'll give it to Josselou. And I put tenuous connections, Gary Megson as manager.
Okay, Steve Hasty.
I'd given in goal. I went for a back three of Griffin, Woodgate, and Abdou Faye. I went a midfield of Guppy on one side, George Easton on the other. I had Stephen Island and Paul Bracewell as the two holding, and I had the tallest front three you've ever seen. Certainly, when it come to headers, these would win everything. I had John Tudor, I had Billy Whitehurst, and I had Shola. And I also had Michael O'Neill as the manager.
Okay, Mitch.
When we're given in goal, and then a back three of Woodgate in both the phase, and then wing backs of Griffin and Guppy, and then Bracewell, Island and Suddick in midfield, and the rascal front two of John Tudor and Josselou, and the manager Michael O'Neill.
Okay, and last but by no means least, Stu.
Very similar. Given in goal, back three. I did a 3-3-1-3. Back three of Griffin, Faye, and Woodgate. A midfield three of Bracewell, Island, and Suddick. And then I had George Easton behind a front three of Shola, Owen, and Josselou. And Michael O'Neill is the manager.
Great stuff, lads, as always.
Magic.
Yeah, great show and some great memories, and look forward to seeing you guys next week. And just a little mention to anyone who likes the retro stuff and likes the Dream Team, we are going to do something a little bit special. We're going to pre-record George and Holly together. So we have the oldest supporter and the youngest supporter swapping notes on teams. So George's team is in. Just waiting for Holly's. We're going to pre-record that. So that's something to look forward to. Looking forward to that anyway. Okay, see you next week, guys. Take care.
Cheers, guys.
Cheers, everyone.